Would you consider yourself the type of adult child who came from a family where it was just you and your mom or a female who was raising you? Would you consider yourself a child, a grown-up child, I should say, who never really felt like an adult? You felt like something was missing because of the dynamic within your family? Have you ever asked yourself why your father didn't stick around? Well, in today's video, I'm going to highlight some of the negative consequences of, dealing with a father who just was absent, right? He's not well enough. He's not rounded enough. He's not mature enough to be the dad that you've needed him to be. Either he's absent by choice or not, right? He's unhealthy psychologically and emotionally for you. Or it was just a bad mix, right, between your mother and your father. So in today's video, I'm going to be highlighting daddy issues. But before we do that, let me go ahead and briefly introduce myself in case you are new. My name is Tamara. I'm an internationally and board certified trauma therapist. I'm also licensed in mental health, and I specialize in treating children, teens, and families, as well as adults who are dealing with trauma. Let's go ahead and jump in. So this is actually a viewer requested video, and because this is, incorporating my area of expertise, I figured I would go ahead and do a video. I'm going to post that comment right here, and I love when you guys comment. I love when you ask for topics, so keep them going. That kind of helps us continue to educate one another and grow on the channel. So, daddy issues are something that really can slow the development psychologically and emotionally of yourself down. It's a situation where, you can't contribute to that toxic dynamic between your mother and your father. You can't contribute in a positive way where you can maybe get in and make those two get along, mom and dad, or you can't, borrow your dad's love for a certain period of time. He is absent, he's not available, and maybe he doesn't want to be available, right? And so those kind of fathers are just so disheartening. They're disappointing because they can't step up and be the dad that you need them to be. So, sadly, when a mother is dealing with this, they probably feel lonely. And I've had parents come into my office and say, you know what, I'm lonely. His or her dad won't step up to the plate. So then what happens to that mother who starts to feel lonely, unsupported, not loved and cared for? What happens to her? Can you guess? She tends to go to another man, and it's either a man that she can date or a man that she can marry, or she uses one of her male friends as that surrogate father. But what does that do to you? Research suggests that 1 in 5 American mothers go from one guy to the next, to the next, to the next to try to fill that void of the biological father not being present. But that has a negative impact on the child growing up, and it can have a negative impact on you even as an adult. There's a researcher at the University of Michigan. Her name is Cassandra, I hope I'm saying her last name right, Darius, and she's the one who did this study. And she found out that, kids who are growing up in households where there's multiple father figures, they tend to be economically and psychologically disadvantaged. They also tend to lack appropriate boundaries. They also, struggle with the negative dynamics of dealing with that surrogate dad, and then dealing with mom, and then dealing with the biological dad, and maybe dealing with the stepdad. There's a lot of dynamics that are in households where there's multiple men that the child looks to as a father figure. She also found out that they are underemployed, these kind of moms, and I'm going to add into the mix traumatized. Now, the mother may not be traumatized, but the child may be, because there's too many ranges of boundaries and emotional affection and expectations that you as the child are going to have to adapt to. And so that can be really traumatic if you're not careful. And if the mother doesn't know how to manage all those dynamics, it can really traumatize you. Now, I want to highlight what it is that actually traumatizes you. So the first traumatic impact that you are likely to experience as a child growing up with multiple father figures is a mixed perception of healthy bonds. How can you learn healthy communication and healthy bonds and healthy relationships, and especially if all of those relationships failed and all of those relationships ended up as being destructive ones, right? There are some moms who get in multiple relationships with different guys, but it's the same kind of relationship dynamic. It's the same traumatic situation. And so there's codependency, there's, emotional distress. There may also be some traumatic bonding involved. There may also be some domestic violence and some emotional and psychological abuse. And so as an adolescent and as an adult, you may begin to take on the mindset that, you know what, it's okay to jump from one relationship to the next. And let me just, put out here as a disclaimer, this is not a video to judge or to zone in on unhealthy behaviors. It really is highlighting what you as the child growing up, under your mom had to deal with and how that impacts you over time. Research suggests that there's a lot of negative connotations to these kind of families. So you may have a really hard time having healthy relationships yourself because of the mixed perception of healthy relationships that you had growing up. The next thing that you're likely to see is what's known as code switching. Now, a lot of you probably know code switching to be a racial trauma term. It's when you are African American, but you know how to turn on, or you could be Hispanic or Indian, but you know how to turn on the proper side to fit into society in a certain way. That's probably, if you know what this term is what you have heard. But code switching can also mean switching back and forth between identities and language and, tone of voice and whatever you need to do to be accepted. And this is something that can happen to you growing up under a mother who has various relationships with males. You may code switch, right? So here's an example. I'm going to code switch with my dad. I'm going to say, Dad, you're everything I ever wanted. I love you. You're right. Mom is not stable. Mom is emotionally unstable. I'm with you, Dad. And then you may go to your stepdad and code switch there. Yeah, my dad's a loser. He never was there for me. He's just a creep, And then you may get back with your biological mother and code switch there as well. Mom, I don't know what's wrong with my stepdad or my dad. They're just not healthy people to be in my life. That is code switching. And you can definitely do it if you're growing up under, a mother who has had various guys in her life that you've been introduced to. How do you develop a stable, predictable relationship and identity if you're constantly code switching, right? The next thing is sexual abuse, and there's a lot of research that supports sexual abuse among step parents and their child, right? Or their stepchild, I guess I should say. And that's really unsettling. It can be emotional, psychological, physical, or sexual, and it is very disturbing, to say the least. Identity confusion and shame and guilt. You may feel really guilty if you are trying to, as a child growing up, make healthy relationships and, stay in them. You have to explain to your friends, to your neighbors, maybe even to your teacher, maybe even to your principal that my mom's with a new guy this time. Or, Uncle Jim is not there anymore. It's now Uncle Tommy, right? All of those things creates a fragmented development of the self. Because again, you may code switch, you're going to develop a mixed perception of how relationships operate, and you may find it really hard to connect emotionally and psychologically, I'm not going to allude to the fact that this could cause dissociative identity disorder, but I think that it can cause, in some ways, if it's traumatic, some dissociation, splitting off of the self in many ways. Okay, so keep that in mind. If you want to learn a little bit more about dissociation, go ahead and check out my recent video on that topic. I think, it's important for me to mention as well that there is often a maintained downward spiral in families where there's multiple men that the mother is dating over time. There's a maintenance of a downward spiral, economically, financially, emotionally, psychologically. It's hard to get out of a certain mindset if you're maintaining it over time, but with different guys. You're not progressing, right? So if you had a mother like this, she wasn't able to progress. She's stuck because she's continuing to go through multiple relationships over time, and things change. I'm of the firm belief that, the mind and the emotions of the mother goes through a lot. It's like a tornado of cognitive traps and emotional traps when you jump through many relationships, right? Because that particular mother can't keep things straight if she's constantly up and down in emotions and thoughts about the guys that she's dating. A lot of times these kind of women are codependent, they are traumatized themselves, or they themselves have had a parent who did the same thing to them. So it's, I guess we can categorize this, I should say, as intergenerational trauma. Risk factors are really important in studies that focuses on daddy issues or multiple relationships in the child's life. Risk factors are things that make it really hard for us to be successful. Lower socioeconomic status, untreated mental health and substance abuse issues, teenage pregnancy, early exploration of drugs and alcohol. All of those things, failing grades, delinquency, conduct disorder, fire setting, sociopathy, right, that may be developing in you as an adolescent. All of those things are risk factors that make it really hard for you to climb up and out of a situation that is ultimately harmful to you. Poor quality of family involvement is another thing. Poor quality of father and family involvement is another thing. So if a mom is constantly skipping from one person to the next, how do you engage in a family dynamic with someone if they're there for 2 months and they're gone, right? Or they're there for 2 weeks and they're gone. You're going to have a poor quality of family and father involvement because somewhere it's going to get disrupted and mom's going to try it again with the next person. And, that just keeps you up and down, up and down, up and down. And it's just not healthy. Now, let me just highlight too, we are so limited on research in this area, and we need to get more research on this. The long-term effects of daddy issues or the long-term effects of trying to adapt to multiple fathers in your life is really slim. And so when I was doing some research on this topic, it was really hard to find some concrete research that highlighted the negative effects of a mother who's engaging with multiple men. But I did find the research eventually through a lot of my own resources and other professionals and my colleagues, but it was really hard. We definitely need more research in this area, especially when we are talking about family trauma. Thank you so much for being with me today in this video, guys. Go ahead and give this video a thumbs up if it was helpful, and hit that subscribe button and that bell button so you can continue, if I can say it, to get more videos just like this. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.